And more than that, I look at the number of women and women of color in particular, in my experience, who have gotten unwell in their work and who have sacrificed so much. And like, it was kind of like the give, give, give. And I think at different points, we have a lot of capacity to give. That capacity does change as our wellness changes, and we don't always honor that. But in one thing that's really important to me in this particular cohort for managers of color is getting people to stop and think about where wellness and rest and joy. To me, sustainability is wellness. And it's not sustainability so that you can do the work. It's wellness generally, because if I am well and you are well, then the work that we do is already going to be different. The work that we're able to hold is already going to be different because it's coming from a different place and a different energy.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better. Each week, I invite you to care more about a specific social or environmental issue so that we can create a better world together. Today, we're concluding a deep dive on what has been a 3-week series specifically on the shutdown of DEI programs and what it can mean to each and every one of us. 2 weeks back, I introduced you to Rachel Siegel, a DEI-focused consultant that I met in an Antiracist Development Group for white managers last winter. Last week, I introduced you to Davey Schlasko. He's the person responsible for founding Think Again Training, the group that created that program. This week, you'll meet Janae Peters. She is responsible for co-creating another anti-racist development group for Think Again Training, this one geared at managers of color. Janae Peters is an educator, high school administrator, and social worker. She's able to bring all of these lenses together in her consulting work with Think Again Training and Consulting. I'm thrilled to have her here today, and I hope you can join me in welcoming her to the show. Hi, Janae. It's so nice to have you here today. I love that you were able to be a fly on the wall in my interview with Davey. I think it gives you a little bit of context for the things that we're talking about today. But I'd like to start each conversation with really a moment from you to talk about your experience and what brought you to this moment.
To this moment. I think one of the things I'm one of those people who experiences vocation. So I'm a person who knew at 4 years old, before I ever went to school, for example, that I wanted to be a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. There's video of me saying, my mom saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, a teacher. She's like, you haven't even gone to school yet. I'm like, I know. But when I get there, I'm going to teach my brother and sister everything I learned at big girl school. And she's like, you don't have a brother and sister. I'm like, but I will. And
if you don't have them biologically, you find them another way, right?
I did end up having a brother and sister. They're twins, and they came just a year later. But I've experienced vocation. So I'm a person who at every turn has kind of felt called to be in different places, spaces, and with different movements and organizations. And so I'd say for this moment, for the managers of color cohort in particular, I've lived a life that has really been centered around the inquiry around what will actually support someone who looks like me and who is from where I'm from, in experiencing authentic and creative, even growth and leadership, like in the places where I am that were not designed with me in mind, and weren't designed with my growth or my success in mind either. So I have, at different turns of life, really sought learning opportunities, sought community, sought cohorts and affinities, anything that would support me in learning about myself, learning about my needs as an employee of any sort, but particularly as a leader, and in thinking about what it looks like to support others in that process in a way that honors all of our sort of thusness, and doesn't require us to limit or not engage some aspect of who we are as we do that.
Now, I've heard many people ask the question, why do you have to, or why should you necessarily separate, let's say, a course like this that's cohort based between people of color and white people? Mm-hmm. And I really want to hear your perspective. I have my own, of course, too.
Yeah, happy to share. So I think that they have different needs require different structures. So there's a lot of time where my learning and growth is in a sort of mixed space, right? And the last piece that I named in that, how do I get to this moment? The last piece I named around without giving up some aspect of who I am is part of the reason that affinity spaces, or a space that does not have white people in it, is a little extra important. So what I find is that when I'm engaging spaces where white people are, it's either I have to make some key decisions. So it's either, assimilate in some way to where you are, to the needs of the place, to the what people say is the philosophy of the space, again, which was not designed for me. And it might be a place where I can make an offering and people are like, oh, that offering is beautiful. We are going to shift our space. But more often than not, that's not the case. So the decision is, or what I have learned over time, what I've experienced over time, is it's not that I can't grow in spaces that have white people. It's that my needs are often not met in that space because the dominant voice and perspective is there. And when I enter a space that is not centered around the dominant perspective or voice, then I'm in many ways feeling seen in this way, in ways that I didn't before. And there are different aspects of my identity. For me, race is a very salient aspect of my identity. Again, it's one of my identities that are not that is targeted as opposed to a more privileged identity, right? So when I'm in spaces that are made for women, that is also a different experience for me than when I'm in mixed gender spaces. But for race in particular, there are so many, I think, so there's so much to do with the historical context of how we have come to be and to exist in even the spaces where we are, that I have found that affinity spaces are one of the few spaces where my shoulders move from here to here, where it's not like I don't have to worry that I'm representing everyone who looks like me or is from where I'm from. I don't have to worry about what they might be thinking or might be holding about me and my race. It's a space where I get to exist outside, both in a big way inside my race, but also outside of my race. And the other things that trouble me get to surface more because I'm in a space with other people who have a sense of or understand it, even if it's in a different way, that experience. One way I think a lot of people understand the value of leadership development. I don't think that that's lost on folks. But one of the things that I recognized pretty early on was that there is a personal and professional growth that comes with leadership development. And a lot of folks, again, I think of it in terms of dominant perspective. A lot of folks from the dominant perspective who are white, everything that's around them in a lot of these spaces is encouraging their growth. They're feeling seen in other people who look like them, other experiences, even sometimes my experience. Whereas for me, I can engage a lot of professional growth in mixed spaces, but the personal growth is just a little different when I've had the opportunity to be in affinity-based cohorts with other folks of color.
I mean, the other thing that I think you haven't clearly brought up is just that, when you're participating as a part of a cohort, you're there to learn and share.
Yes.
And if you were mixed into a group like the white development group that I was a part of, the Antiracist Development Group, you might actually have to shift a little bit into that teacher seat, or that people have, in my seat, maybe an expectation that you would share your experience in another way. Now you're in a space of educating me about what your experience is, as opposed to being in this space of shared learning.
Yeah. And I think that's
perspective, right?
Yes, and I think that's like the shoulder dropping, right? So I don't have to be on and ready again and representative and educating. I can learn. And even though I'm
And you do
participating,
not have to code switch the same way. Just as another example, feel like you can, I don't know, show up as your more authentic self. If that, not to say that you would be inauthentic, like that's not my impression, but just it's different. You know, like you come at it from a space of almost that responsibility.
yes.
Sharing of your experience rather than that open learning space. Now, I think one thing we have to acknowledge, that's the first step, right? Acknowledging that we experience things a little bit differently and that you would want to therefore create different spaces for each group to get the most out of these activities. What I found as a part of the Antiracist Development Group was that still, I think sometimes people were careful about what they might share about their experience in a racialized environment, because it's even hard to, I think, confront simple things like I might have chosen to learn to speak French as opposed to Spanish in high school, in part because there's this indoctrination that occurs in our culture that sees this group as somehow less, right? And but European languages, like learn French or learn German or learn Italian, like that's somehow okay. But because, Spanish in California especially is so associated with Mexico, I think there was judgment around that kind of crept in. I was also the daughter of a man who married a Brazilian woman, and she spoke Spanish and Portuguese, and I didn't like her very much. So
it's always interesting how our biases.
Like, no, I'm going to learn French.
I'm going to do anything that you're not doing.
And that was probably more the motivator. But I have had for these stretches of time, even this confrontation, like you look at translation of languages. So if you're looking specifically at language, just as an example, you take a paragraph in English and you translate it to French, and often the French is longer. And you take that same paragraph and you translate it to Spanish, and often it's shorter.
Yes.
And it's because there's different ways to construct the language to describe things. And it doesn't mean it's better or worse that one's longer, one's shorter. But you almost like have this, oh, well, the French language is so beautiful. I think Spanish is beautiful too. And now I'm trying to learn it in part in protest for Trump trying to remove the second language from just about everything that we see out there. And I'm developing more friendships with Spanish-speaking people from Mexico and from other spots around the globe with intent even.
We always get what we need, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm putting energy into those spaces because I think it's important. And if I'm going to be a better anti-racist, just as one example, this is one way I can do that. Like learn to speak in another language that, a dominant part of our immigrant population speaks Spanish as a first language. Perhaps a little bit of a track off the main frame here, but wanted to share that. Now, I understand that you use specific frameworks as part of this program that address the unique challenges that managers of color experience in the workplace and beyond, because it's both personal and professional development. There's no way to really tease these out from one another in many cases. Talk to me a bit about that. What are these structures and how might people learn more about them as they're considering taking a course like this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. One of the ways, we had so much fun creating this, like what you just talked about with your intention with expanding language skills in Spanish and like really understanding the cultural context of that. We did something similar when really trying to bring this cohort's work to life. One of the things that we often understand is that leadership, and even great leadership, kind of like what you were just saying about it's longer, so it must be better, it must be beautiful. There are ways that people think about leadership and leading that are so rooted in these antiquated measures for skills. So it's like if someone is authoritative, or if someone strikes you as the expert of experts, if they can say more about it, then we're like, must trust this person. They've got it. They're a leader. And it's not necessarily the people who include everyone's ideas and perspectives, the folks who demonstrate care and support. So there's a way that people have come to think about leadership that is also really grounded in the dominant perspective. And we use the language of like white supremacy culture, which is, again, this authoritative, like, if you lay down the hammer, then you must be a good leader. And we it was beyond intentional. It was essential for us to ground the work of the cohort in liberation frameworks. So in theories that are really understand that there's a history of oppression and the need for liberation in so many parts of our world, and that our understanding of different cultures, how those cultures came to be, our understanding of the wisdoms that have come from the different ancestral knowledges, the wisdoms for how to be in community, like all of those things are knowledges and technologies that can actually help us more authentically engage leadership. So I'm a person, I think this is probably connected a little to what I said earlier too. I'm a person who would never on my own terms have said, I want to be a leader. But I'm a person who demonstrated leadership skills in whatever role that I had. And then people would say, you're a leader.
Well, teaching is leading. And this is the thing, like, we don't necessarily put them in the same spot.
And it's like, you should be the leader, or like, clearly, what's going on. So tell us what to do or where to go. And I think one of the things that we have been really mindful of when we think about leadership development is the role of self-awareness, the role of community, the role of conflict and feedback, the role of like all of those things, and how it impacts us from our racial lens, from our different intersectional lenses. So it doesn't just impact me racially, it impacts me, leadership impacts me because of my gender as well, like, and everything that comes with that. It impacts me because of other intersections of my identity. Like I grew up in a very Christian mindset, and people don't always understand the role that religion plays in our understanding of leadership, even, or of what we have seen in leadership in our different churches or synagogues, and
gender roles too, right?
And how we understand like who does what, who's responsible for care versus who's responsible for knowledge. And so we've taken all of this and thought about, again, liberation in particular, as it supports our understanding of systemic oppression and historical oppression, and also using frameworks that help us understand our intersectionalities, and how that impacts both our understanding of what is expected of us and our understandings of what's possible for us in different contexts and situations. And we use all of that, bring that all together or the goal is to bring it, because it's our first cohort, but to bring it into our awareness in a way that supports us in creating an actual leadership action plan that folks can come out with as a tangible thing to take with them as they're assessing on their own terms, and again, with the support of their employees and community, not communication. The way to assess for yourself how leadership is going from a more informed and more grounded understanding of leadership theory.
That's wonderful. Now, I mean, I'm in my PhD program for sustainability education, and one of the things we often touch on is the need to consider a course, especially one like this, as being active and open to change. And as you, I think, talked about in the beginning of our conversation, sometimes somebody can show up with a new perspective that might, or maybe they recommend an article or a book that could change how you're leading the course. That the course itself is dynamic. And when you have a cohort-based experience where people are meeting weekly, each person is bringing something unique to that session, and you're learning together. It's really a sustainability education in action, but in a leadership framework. It's what it feels like. That's what my experience was at any rate.
Yes. And I think that is so key. There's a way of understanding knowledge and knowledge transmission that is just about receiving too, right? Like, someone speaks at me, I receive the knowledge, and now I have it. And actually, that is my experience of a lot of leadership development situations. Is like someone saying, I'm the best
Read
leader.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People and then do this exercise.
You got it. And for us, it's let's think about this together. What have we learned so far? What have we learned so far? And how do we take some time at every point to share about ourselves, share about our knowledges and wisdoms, and combine these to really highlight that there are so many expansive ways to engage us. I think that's at the root of what we're offering. I think I have had many experiences of people who are folks of color who enter leadership positions and just feel so out of place. And I think it's more than not being equipped. I actually think it's just not having an understanding of this larger context that's around them, and how they can navigate it. And so I think some of the work of this cohort too is really expanding people's senses of their skill sets, their possibilities, and also expanding their network for problem solving, for understanding different ways of doing things. One of my favorite things in my world right now, is I've been an administrator for, I don't know, I guess almost 10 years now. I hadn't thought about it that way. But one of my favorite things that I have is a group chat of other friends who I started off teaching with, who are also mostly administrators at this point, or definitely have had leadership positions. But when we're going through something in our schools or in our spaces, we go to that group chat and say, hey, has anyone dealt with this? Has anyone seen this before? Am I missing something in how I'm thinking about this? And that's a mixed group of folks. But I think I can say for sure that there aren't a lot of people whose next mode is share and gather understanding from my network. A lot of people actually, I think, because of some understandings of dominant perspectives in leadership, might instead actually just try to keep it to themselves or handle it themselves. And so what we're trying to do is expand problem solving processes. We're trying to expand folks' prowess and experience of change theory, and like understanding what it looks like to bring intention to change and growth processes for whole organizations as we think about things like equity, as we think about things like access, as we think about inclusion, as much as the world right now wants us to not say some of those words, right? Like
we're going to go there. Like, this is my next part of the conversation. I really feel like
but really like
talk about that.
Yes. But as we think about what that requires of us, like that's a lot of what the cohort is working to do. How can we get equipped to hold these larger complex processes while understanding what our strengths are, what our growth edges are, what the intersections of our identities might mean for how we're received, for what our approach might be. Like we're doing all of that while creating a strong peer network. And the goal is to have something that they can always return to, both like in each other, in what's created through our work in that space, like in our discussions, in our canvas, whatever the things are, like have something that's tangible that you can return to as you continue to grow, develop, and hold more evolving change processes as our world continues to evolve too.
Well, and I have to say, I took this, the version for white leaders really through the election season and election day. And as you shared, you could have things come up that are affecting you and you're coming together as a group. And so I would say that the course itself was also therapeutic because we came together to really voice our concerns with what was happening with the incoming Trump administration, worries that we might have about things like funding disappearing from education. There were teachers in our cohort. There were professionals that work in DEI. There were all sorts of individuals that are connected to public programs that might be threatened. And so, of course, a lot to worry about, frankly. And
Sure.
now with this movement to really scrub all of our websites that are government related of anything connected to DEI, of removing language even related to gender basis and women
Mhm.
from research that is funded by the NSF to halt that kind of work. There's a lot that is threatened that I think people didn't, like, some of which we knew to expect and some of which is already showing is more extreme than what we thought would happen, especially this early in the Trump administration. So I wonder if you could share anything about how this particular cohort or future cohorts
Mhm.
might help people even position their thinking with regard to the current political challenges that are affecting us in and outside of the workplace.
Mhm.
And also, um, if you're covering things like, and this is a question for you, I
Mhm.
don't know if you're covering this in the sessions or not, but I think one of the most important tools that I've learned over the course of my leadership career
Mhm.
is boundary setting.
Mhm.
And I think, especially if you're talking about owning your own time and how much work you do outside of work hours and how willing you are to interface in the off hours, and how there's this kind of mission creep into your personal life, a lot of which you might not be paid for and which is kind of expected.
Yeah.
Um, at any rate, I wonder if you could comment on those two things, and then I'd like to see where the conversation takes us from there.
Yeah, it's always so interesting to me. I remember, and this is my own thing, but I remember early in my career, people kept asking if I wanted to be a DEI professional. So, like, the multicultural affairs or da 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 da. And I kept saying, no, no, I'm gonna still do the work, but I don't need it to be called that. And
Mm-hmm.
I say that, but I always have felt it is important to name things what they are. And that's the thing that's happening right now is they're really trying hard to take away our ability to name something for what it is. What is confusing to my logic, I have a very logical, very practical brain. What is most confusing to me in this moment is that what folks are calling DEI, I don't actually even recognize that. It's like, so I'm like, what do you even think DEI is? And I've been seeing a number of practitioners who are saying, it's much better when you get them to say the words instead of saying DEI. Say I'm tired of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I don't actually think most of them know that those are the words they're saying when they say DEI, because what they're really saying is we are worried. We are beyond worried, so worried that we have to switch up this whole thing because we feel like white people, white men, aren't getting their fair shake in things. And it's all because of this DEI. And it feels like they're layering on, and you're taught early on. I was an English lit major in undergrad, but you're taught early on to that your analysis doesn't come from up top. You don't just say, here's my thesis, and then find all the evidence that supports your thesis, right? That's confirmation bias. What you do instead is do the work of bringing the ideas out, and from the ideas you name what your thesis or what your argument is. And so one of the things I've thought a lot about this particular moment in time is that there's what we're being forced to respond to is a fear that a few people have that they are irrelevant, that they won't exist, and that every single thing that has happened over the past few decades, because I'll say, like, people talk about George Floyd as a big moment for DEI uprising, but I would say the work had been happening for a long time before, even for that moment to happen. But what they're saying is we fear that we are not like, what it actually reminds me of is 1870. It reminds me of Reconstruction. In those times, like when you read about that stuff, it's like it's a very similar playbook. It's not something that people haven't seen before. And I will say in our cohort, part of the way that we know to address these kinds of things, and part of our layout is starting with our why and our purpose. And I find that in these times, I've especially early on in January, the singular disheartening thing for me was actually seeing people, people's sense of purpose kind of like like the rug was taken from under them, right? And there's something about purpose, there's something about understanding our strengths and really understanding the barriers that that's actually how we're starting our cohort. And I actually think that the way we are running our sessions are good ways for folks to stay strong and kind of create our stalwart defenses in other parts of our worlds too. So acknowledging our whys, naming our strengths, but also naming the barriers and constraints that are ahead of us. And then we have in the second session, I'm pretty sure we called the next two sessions building liberatory leadership and building liberatory organizations. So in that sense, we have an individual reflection and focus around navigating and transforming systems. And then we move next into an organizational action focus. So we're acknowledging that a lot of the work of right now starts with our own awareness, starts with our understanding of our strengths, of our lanes, of where we have impact, our locus of control. And then we move out to our organizational and action focus from our individual and reflective focus. And then we use the language, right? Like we keep thinking about leading for justice, what it looks like to embody equitable leadership in action. So I don't have to call my work equity work in order to make decisions that are equitable, right? I don't have to call my work justice promoting work in order to bring intention and make decisions that are justice oriented. And then I would say that's the first half of our work together because we're doing 8 sessions. And then the next half, we start immediately with rest, joy, sustainability. I love that you're getting your PhD in sustainability practices, but rest, joy, and sustainability. And we start to think about what it looks like to cultivate the kinds of practices and skills that support our longer term work, our longer term leadership and ability to hold these processes. And then we'll move into visioning, because part of what initiatives like these executive orders, part of what anything that tries to sort of tamper progress does is it tries to take away our capacity to vision, to dream, and to design. And that, like, those are things that I would argue are the hardest for people to take away from you unless you let them. And let them is a light term. I know that so much is happening to people that's feeling really hard right now. But when I say let them, I mean, like, I'm going to keep visioning and dreaming and designing for a liberatory future, regardless of what's happening in these 4 years, as hard as they might be. I'm attending to them. I'm using my locus of control to figure out what my lane is, how to act, how to contribute to movements, how to strategize and doing all that. But I'm also still visioning and designing so that I'm ready when the tide turns yet again. And in my actions, right, I'm anticipating a change in the tide. And I'm hopeful and embodying hope that not only in concept, but in action, that I'm dreaming of a liberatory future. And then for our final session, we have what we call like collective leadership in action. And to me, that is one of the biggest reminders that nobody does this alone, right? So it's like the personal and community-based planning is where in the final session we'll strategize, plan, remind people of the rest, joy, and sustainability, like all of those things, and send them off in that kind of key way. And I think, like, I really do think that this is in alignment with the way the world is working right now. So like, we're talking about this for leadership, but this kind of planning, these kinds of sessions are also kind of key for getting through everything that's happening right now and the deluge of how it's coming at people, because it's meant to throw us off kilter. It's meant to support us in not feeling grounded and centered. And so I think this is also like a good model for continuing to work through, strategize, and dream, even in these moments that are feeling, I would say, beyond dark, and that are like the deluge that we're experiencing right now.
Well, I've been thinking in pictures a bit. And so as I listen to you, I like to connect to a metaphor of some sort. And if we think of it as, let's say, traversing a sea, like, you're going somewhere. Your vision is of landing on the shore on the opposite coast somewhere. Storm comes through. Sometimes you got to throw the anchor out and wait it out.
Yep.
Sometimes the wind dies out and your sail is just, you're left adrift and you've got to wait until there's the next wind will pick up. We are affected by natural systems. We are affected by political systems. But if we're able to keep an eye on the things that are in front of us and within our locus of control, then we can protect our mental health, and we can also prepare for that next phase. Like you're talking about, like when it's time to tack so you can continue to sail across the seas, when the right winds come and the storms start to, you gotta be ready for it. So I love all of that. And just taking some notes here, the fact that you talk about this period of really reflecting on rest, joy, and sustainability. And this is essentially self-care. It's mental health care. It's ensuring that you are taken care of so that you can show up and do the work, right?
You talked about it in terms of boundaries earlier, like you were saying, what are the recommendations for like the boundaries that you keep? And I think all of these things are connected, especially to sustainability. And I really wish that earlier in my career, I had actually listened to everyone around me who was talking to me about the boundaries to have.
Slow down,
And I remember my first year teaching, I was 21, fresh out of college, working at a boarding school. And I remember one of my first colleagues who lived in the dorm as well with his wife and 2 kids. I remember him saying to me on the first night that I was there, he said, you have to take time for yourself because this place is going to take everything that you give it. Like no one's going to, he's like, no one's going to tell you to stop. Like once you have offered it, it's like, so you have to, take some time and do you and have that not be connected to what's here. That did not mean anything to me at that time, but it wasn't until like 7 years later, I was like, I feel burnt out. Like I need to take some time for myself. But in leadership development, what I love about boundaries, and this is still connected to like locus of control. And I definitely feel this in all of my intersections. So as a Black person, as a woman, I don't know if people consider me young anymore. I'm like at the mid-range. I'm 15 years into my career. But especially when I was 21, 25, 27, I really wish that my 30-year-old self, the self that figured out how to, that if you don't send that email at 11 p.m., that's okay. Tomorrow was still going to come.
Hey, I'm approaching 50 and I still have that voice in my head that says I got to do it now.
Yeah, so but what happened for me is I learned in my body and in leadership and through cohorts and all these spaces that actually wellness, like what I had been doing was trying to create wellness practices on top of work. And what I have learned over time, and I think what I share with anyone, any mentee, anyone who will listen to me, is that it's actually wellness is what's central, and we plan everything around that. And the way you know that is what happens when you get sick. You figure out what was most important, all the while. And I look back to people like Bell Hooks when she wrote Sisters of the Yam and talked about this very thing, like this sustainable practice of wellness. And more than that, I look at the number of women and women of color in particular, in my experience, who have gotten unwell in their work and who have sacrificed so much. And like, it was kind of like the give. And I think at different points, we have a lot of capacity to give. But that capacity does change as our wellness changes, and we don't always honor that. But in one thing that's really important to me in this particular cohort for managers of color is getting people to stop and think about where wellness and rest and joy and sustainability. To me, sustainability is wellness, and it's not sustainability so that you can do the work. It's wellness generally, because if I am well and you are well, then the work that we do is already going to be different. The work that we're able to hold is already going to be different because it's coming from a different place and a different energy. And so there's something that's deep in this cohort that, again, I find it to be true for a lot of women and other folks with other marginalized identities. And then when you have that extra intersection of being a person of color in these spaces and these organizations not designed for you, there's this extra layer of the need to have a tight boundary around what's in your control around your wellness.
Well, I love that. And as you may remember from being a fly on the wall in my last interview with Davey, we talked about the reading list that I'm building specific to these topics. And I have not read Bell Hook's Sisters of the Yam. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll add that to the reading list for certain. We have several in here that I think are kind of like must reading for anybody interested in this type of work, including 2 books by Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategies and Pleasure Activism, White Supremacy Culture, which is both a website and...
Adrienne Marie Brown's Holding Change is also phenomenal.
Holding Change. Great,
Yeah.
I'll add that one in.
And
I'm really enjoying her Emergent Strategies. I'm on my second reading of it.
yes.
Holding Change, you said?
Yes, Holding Change. And then another one I would recommend is Kelly Hayes and Mariam Makaba. And it's Let This Radicalize You. And it's
Kelly Hayes and who else?
Mariam, Mariame, and then last name Kaba.
Let This Radicalize You. Great. 2 new books to add to this list. I have a list of podcasts as well. I don't know if you have a favorite that you'd like to add that you think is supportive of this type of work.
I have not been good in the past 5 years of listening to podcasts, but
that's fine. We have Code Switch 1619, Octavia's Parables, Seeing White, Mother Country Radicals, all of which I think are really great. And Octavia's Parables, she's a fiction author, science fiction author, but she also has, I think, several books that are just fun reading in general. Well, that's wonderful. Now, as I sit back and reflect on our conversation today, I would love for you to offer, before we wrap, your perspective on where we are right now, on what is keeping you hopeful, and perhaps what you're visioning, dreaming, and designing. Because you talk so much about what this course will do for people. And I know you've spent a lot of time deep in reflection as you prep for a course like this, as you bring a cohort in. And I really think we need hope today. And so even hearing from someone like yourself who's leading one of these groups, what's working for you, what is making you hopeful, or where any silver lining might be.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think this moment is calling for, and I can't stress this enough, is collective care. Like this is not something that any one of us can get through on our own. When I think even about this cohort, there are 4 of us who worked to co-create this. And we needed that perspective. We needed that accountability with each other. We needed that care of and for each other in order to create this and to have perspective while thinking about what we're building out for others. And I think all of that is connected to where I experience hope. Again, I told you I'm a very logical and practical human. So hope for me is not this, it's not a super dreamy or a super abstract thing for me. It's a very practical thing. And where I experience hope is in seeing people responding and engaging and learning and loving harder and caring harder and trying to figure out in their different spaces what to do. I'm also a student of history, and I see that a lot of, I'm not a person who gets worried about when there's conflict in strategy or approach. I think that there is room for all of us. I actually think historical lessons tell us that when people have believed that there is one right way, which I think we name in different spaces as a white supremacy culture kind of practice, there's no one right way, no one right way. And I think that keeps me encouraged, because I see the more people create spaces where they understand their strengths, understand how they can be creative, how they can dream, I get encouraged that somebody's strategy, somebody's way, or a combination of those ways are going to get us through these moments. And that really does, on a practical level, keep me encouraged. The ways that I'm dreaming in an embodied sense. It's something I've been, as a very practical and logical person, I am really good at intellectualizing, which can keep my brain and nervous system kind of calm, but I actually often try to challenge myself to really feel through beyond intellectualizing. So it's a practice I have. And the ways that I have been dreaming is actually by trying to actually be my more creative, emotional self. I do a lot to work on poetry. I'm creating a book of poetry that's about the roots of love. It's really me examining my relationship. I've been in a long-term relationship with my partner, but examining the roots of Black love, like what it actually means for two Black people to come together and decide intentionally to love each other. Like, so the histories that make that possible and challenging, the joys that come out of that. It's really an examination that is helping me feel through and be my more loving, more caring, more open, more expansive self. And that practice actually helps me in my support of young people, in my support of graduate students, in my support of mentees and other folks who look to me for advice and thought partnership. And that dreaming, or giving myself space to create and dream, is really helpful. I've been trying to do a lot more art. And again, these are not modes that I operate in with what I feel is expertise, but they're modes that are helping me examine my needs. They're modes that are helping me dream. And they're helping me to continue to imagine. I was really affected by Rua Benjamin's book, Imagination. And that one, Dr. Benjamin talks a lot about what happens when our creativity and our imagination is taken from us. And I think that that's what we are being shocked into in this moment. And I'm resisting that with everything that I have. And I see other people doing it too. And that's, again, keeps me hopeful.
You're reminding me of a point I made in this week's reflection on reading for my sustainability education course. And, the prompt was something to the effect of, why is the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or why is a supremacist culture problematic? Mm-hmm. Like, basically the same question offered two different ways, right? And I just came forward with sustaining a supremacy culture, whether it be white supremacy or supremacy based on finances. And, really the two things are pretty tied together with colonialist principles and capitalistic society. I mean, we're in it, right? Is that creativity is basically the first thing to go. Yep. And it's because when we start to operate from perspectives of fear, from what I must do, getting trapped into smaller and smaller ways of being, that our collective creativity suffers. Yes. And so I feel like there's just an innate truth to this. Mm-hmm. We can't, as a species, succeed in doing something until we can imagine it.
Exactly. Yep.
And so if we can open our minds and imagine a world that is more fair, yes, where there aren't where we aren't led by oligarchs and where billionaires and coming trillionaires essentially lead everybody else. And we're essentially then living in indentured servitude, which is what happens when you have this vast inequity kind of take hold in a society. I think we've been living in denial for a long time in the United States, like many people thinking that racism doesn't exist or that we don't live in a caste system when all evidence points to the fact that we do. It really is getting us to be able to embrace that creativity and I think move through art, because as you pointed out, you don't have to be expert at painting to express yourself in it.
Right.
I had on this podcast, my very first episode was an interview with the founder of Love Without Borders for Refugees in Need. Kyra is a personal friend of mine. So I brought her on to talk about what she was doing for refugees from Syria, specifically in Aleppo, Greece, where many people were coming over and trying to find refuge. And so she created a program specifically about the arts that would enable children and adults alike to get a little bit of training in art, to be able to express themselves, and then take this art and show it around the world, both digitally because we hit COVID, right? But also having like gallery showings, and then sell those pieces with the money going back to the people that created it to help them get on their feet. It's just a really beautiful program.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she noted was that she had children who had become nonverbal from the trauma that they'd experienced. And then they'd start initiating through art and then suddenly be able to begin speaking and engaging with people again.
I love that.
So the power of art to help you in a time of emotional difficulty or need can't be discounted. So engage in music, even if you're not great at it, sing, produce art, paint, sculpt, whatever it is, you'll be surprised at what it can give back to you. I love that you're writing a book of poetry, and when you're ready to publish it, I hope you'll come back on and talk about it.
I will. Thank you.
Now, if you have any closing words, I will offer you the floor now. Otherwise, we can, or perhaps if you have a question you wish I'd asked that I haven't, you could ask and answer it.
There's not I try to always have questions, but there's not one expressly coming to me. I think the call that I have for everyone is one that might seem a little out of alignment with everything that I've said so far, but I have a strong mentor, someone whose mind and heart I really deeply value, who always says that we're at our best when we're giving from a place of abundance rather than a place of what they call raggedy. And this world is trying to make us really raggedy. It's trying to really run us ragged. And so let's keep imagining, keep visioning, keep people around you who support you in that, and as you do other work too. But it is still possible to be working from a place of abundance and wellness and imagination right now. And that's the thing that I hope folks remind everyone in their circles and their collective care communities, that it's still possible. And it's actually what we're being called on to do at this moment.
I love that. It's beyond what you must do. You must think about what's possible too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Janae.
Thank you for having me.
To find out more about Janae Peters and Think Again training, please visit the links I provide with show notes. You'll find direct links to their social media and website, as well as the blog page for this episode, which includes additional resources that we discussed today. This includes direct links to the past 2 episodes, that interview with Think Again Training's founder, Davy Schlasko, and also Rachel Siegel of Towards Liberation. While you visit our blog on Care More Be Better, I hope that you'll join our mailing list. This will ensure that you are the first to find out about new episodes like this. I only send 1 a week. And for every person who joins our mailing list, I am planting a tree. Thank you for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more. We can be better. We can stay in our creative minds and do great work that really moves us towards liberation. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.